The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, segment one, people. This is Media Monk and general manager for the Evolutionary Astrology Network. Kim Marie's on the line. Just kind of going to check the board here, see if we've got some attendees. Yep, okay, so people are checking in and populating my little dashboard. As most of you know by now, you can see a little, a pane, I guess you'd call it, with a orange arrow that when you click on that, it's going to reveal some functionality here. Most everybody on this call would know now to ask questions to me with that Q&A pane, and I will get it to Kim if it's relevant for the subject matter, or try to answer it myself. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kim Marie, and my recording has started, Kim, so I think we're fine.
All right, thank you, Leroy. Welcome, everyone. Today's class is October 2019, and we are going to work with part 2 of a 2-part series, the chronological aspects of life. Before we get started, first of all, our good old little housekeeping slide that I will skip going over because you have this to refer to if you by any chance want more information. And here are a couple of slides that we looked at with part 1 that we're just going to quickly review in part 2. And this is basically what the fact that what we're working with in this 2-part series are what we call age-related aspects. And so they're more or sometimes called generic aspects because they come along at various chronological time periods. The first Jupiter return at 12, the Saturn opposition at 14. And so we will all experience these aspects at certain time periods of our life, even though there'll be different signs, different houses, and other things going on. Now, what these generic aspects represent is that cycle of life on a generic level. Birth, growth, full bloom to decay, and literally death of the current incarnation. These generic or age-related aspects are in contrast to what we also know as individual aspects, and those are forecasting aspects that become unique to each soul. For instance, I myself am experiencing Pluto transiting over the first house cusp of my chart in 2019. Pluto's 248-year cycle around the zodiac means not every soul will experience Pluto crossing over the ascendant and into their first house. Now, these individual aspects can be transits. They can be secondary or major progressions, which are a day for a year. You move the planets one day forward in the ephemeris for each year of life. They can be tertiary or minor progressions, which are lunar, and that is a day for a month. You move each planet one day's movement for every month of your life. And then, of course, there's also what we call solar arcs or directions, which are a degree for a year. Solar, sun, arc, movement. Every planet is moved 1 degree for each year of your life. Now, even though I've written on here that the individual aspects are going to be based upon your individual chart, where you are in your current evolutionary state of consciousness, and of course, whatever your environmental conditionings have been with family, society, religion, economics, etc. Even those generic or age-related aspects are still going to be based upon your individual chart. Again, they'll fall in specific signs and houses. So as we go through part 2 here, looking at these aspects from age 45 plus, keep in mind that even everything we're talking about here is going to be relatively generic and then it gets fine-tuned and specified one more time according to your unique natal planet, house sign aspects, and that generic forecasting planet where it falls by house and sign. Also, what we had looked at in part 1 is that we don't have too many inclusions of Sun, Mercury, Venus in this 2-part series because they each have an approximately annual cycle around the zodiac. And so once a year, they make every possible aspect to every other planet. And so we know that they are still active in our chart, but this would turn into a 10-week series if we included every time we had Venus, Mercury, or Sun make an aspect, let alone the Moon. So I just put this up here with these 3 inner planets generically. Sun renews creative self-actualization. Mercury renews our thought processing and communications. Venus renews values, both inner, the Taurus 2nd house side, and outer, the Libra 7th house side of relationships. Now we talked about Mars in part 1, so I'm not really going to speak too much about that. Let's move into our new material. And I more or less divided it up 0 to 45 and 45 plus. For no other reason than the ease of dividing it into 2 classes. So the first thing that we are going to look at, starting out with more or less 45 years old, is that each solar arc forecasting planet will be making a waxing semi-square to its natal position. Remember, solar arcs are a degree for a year, and so you can just count 45 degrees for 45 years, and that's moving from new phase to crescent phase. The waxing semi-square, every planet, Sun to natal Sun, solar arc Moon to natal Moon, solar arc Mercury to natal Mercury, and so forth through all of the planetary archetypes. Now, for those of you who reviewed the part 1 of this series, you saw that when we reached those early 40s, we had several aspects going on. We have the first Neptune waxing square, 41, fourth Jupiter opposition, 42, first Uranus opposition, 42, second Saturn opposition, 43, 44. Classically known as midlife aspects in astrology. Well, here's one more that we can add on to it that many may not even pay attention to. I've learned in my 3+ decades that a lot of people will look at transits, then they'll look at progressions. I find very few people really look at solar arcs. And from my experience observing and correlating your solar arc aspects generically and the individual ones that show up in your chart, they are just as active as transits and progressions. I have used transits, major progressions, and solar arcs for decades. And I use all 3 of them equally to get a real complete look at any forecasting that may be going on with any individual. So I will recommend that to any of you studying your own chart or wanting to bloom as your own forecasting astrologer. So we're kind of continuing on with those midlife aspects of our 40s. One more thing to point out here, though, is that from 0 to 45 or new phase, it's yang. Energy is moving out from the center. From 45 to 90, the crescent phase, it's yin. Energy is moving back to the center. So this is a real shift in each planetary archetype of energy. So every planet is reviewing itself, and it's reached the maximum new expressions of something in this life to many degrees, not an absolute. Nothing with these aspects are absolute. But it's reached that point going from new to crescent phase at 45 degrees where it's like, oh, so what is going on in my life? And what is working for me right now? And what's not working? And what is it that I have to start changing in my world with all of these other midlife crises aspects taking place throughout the 40s? Now, it can definitely be at 45 or anywhere along the 40s or before or after, but it can be a classical time period in which we're recognizing that our physical body is not building itself up anymore. It may be naturally starting to wane, just solar arc new phase to crescent with every planet. And we may be finding that it takes us a little more effort to sustain that physical body going forward into the second half of our 40s and then our 50s, 60s, etc. And so life is still evolving. However, this is a real strong time period to reflect and really come to terms with our world, with our life, with our physical body, and some of the limits we're seeing with that coming through, but also with the potential to let go of whatever is no longer working in our life. And I just put up a couple examples. It can be anywhere. Yes, it can be career, relationships, goals, and desires. But if every single planet is 45 degrees from every other planet, it's everything. It's Mercury communications. It's Jupiter philosophy and belief systems. It's Uranus and facing some crises in our individualization um, uh, 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 life or circumstances that is a carryover from the transiting Uranus opposition to itself at age 42. Is every area of life that now is going through reflection, new phase to crescent, yang to yin. Now, here's something else I will say with solar arcs and major progressions. I allow a 3-year window of influence. The year before the aspect, the year of the aspect, and the year after the aspect. That can even be under certain circumstances, multiple personal or individual aspects going on, in which that 3-year can be extended to 4 or even 5 years. The only exception I make to that is the progressions to the moon, because progressed moon moves 13 to 15 degrees a year. Its orb of influence is limited to 3-4 months. It comes down to a few months. But every other major progression, all of the solar arcs, minimum 3-year window. So in this case, the 45 degree aspect, age 44, age 45, age 46. Now, one specific note that I would like to share with you here is that most of the major astrological software, moves the nodal axis forward instead of backwards with solar arcs. Most of your major astral software via progressions moves the nodal axis backwards, but they have a tendency to move this nodal axis forward with solar arcs. And because the mean motion of the nodes 90% of the time is backwards, I don't pay any attention to that forward movement of the nodal axis with solar arcs. And so I remind you, because solar arcs are a degree for a year, you have to go backwards with solar arcs in the nodal axis. And sometimes you're going to have to do that by hand or in your head. So you would literally count 45 degrees backwards from the natal position of the nodal axis to find where the solar arc nodal axis is. Okay, makes sense? Now, depending on which forecasting software you use, you might want to double check that with progressions, major progressions, or even tertiary if you use those. You may want to check those areas as well. Okay. Now, when we move on then to that 46, 47-year-old time period, here we start to move into the third nodal axis opposition. Transiting north node is sitting on natal south node. Transiting south node is sitting on natal north node. So third time, here we are with another opportunity to get really in touch with the emotional karmic patterns on ever deeper and more conscious and objective levels. Oppositions are objectivity. And again, if you want to, you can really listen to part 1 and part 2 back to back. Or I have the printout of all the PowerPoint slides, excuse me, of all of these aspects from 0 to 90 some at the end of this slide, and you can just have a quick referral of that. But taking into consideration that we have been coming through major aspects with Neptune, Saturn, Uranus, and Jupiter in the early 40s, carrying through with the solar arc aspect, oppositions are objectivity. And here's the an important opportunity for emotional objectivity. At this point, in those mid-40s, it's also going to bring in some potential for more and more wisdom to make emotional peace with ourselves. If you would, for just one moment, think about your own nodal axis and think where your south node is by sign and house. You aren't going to just say goodbye and leave it behind. If you're a south node in Taurus, you're still going to be invested in a certain amount of outer security as well as continuing to develop inner security. What you are going to start to become aware of is exactly how you operate on those emotional security levels. And with the opposition, there's got to be some making peace with yourself on emotional levels. There can be some recognition of what is possible to change in your life and what may not be possible to change. If you're starting to get into the second half of your 40s, you may or may not make it up the ladder to be head manager or CEO for whatever company you're working for. It may not be possible for you to still have a biological child at this point in your life. Yeah, science plays with that natural evolution right now. But I think you get the the example and point of what I'm trying to make here with this third nodal opposition. The awareness of your patterns and the ability to make emotional peace with what is and is not possible to change in your world. Doesn't mean you won't still emotionally evolve. And then we move on to approximately 48 years old, and Jupiter returns to its natal position for the 4th time. Now here's where we start to make a little bit of a shift from all that energy of the early to mid 40s that brought midlife crises after midlife crises after midlife crises. And again, all that doesn't mean that it's all negative, but it does really force some natural midlife situations and lessons. So as we get to those late 40s and we run into this Jupiter return, it is an opportunity to renew a sense of hope and optimism within ourselves. Jupiter rules religion, philosophy, spirituality. And so all of our philosophical outlooks on life are reviewed again, and they are meant to expand what may have satisfied our beliefs in our 20s may not work in our late 40s. How are we naturally evolving our philosophical outlooks, our spiritual understandings? And as that is reviewed, evolved, expanded, it's meant to give us a renewed sense of purpose in life. We're realizing that as the youth of the 30s and 40s passes by, it's not all over. And perhaps some of you have heard about those time periods in the 50s where it's like a renewal of life in youth again. We've raised the children. Perhaps we're now grandparents. We are hopefully, kind of moving forward with career or whatever ways. In other words, we have a lot of our physical life established. And this can be a time period to reestablish, renew emotional, mental, and spiritual levels. And so then that moves us forward into the last of the 40s and the beginning of the 50s. And we're going to run into the second time that Saturn makes the waning or last quarter square to itself. For simplicity of understanding and typing, I just went to waxing instead of first quarter and waning instead of last quarter. It can be, again, crescent or first quarter phase. It can be disseminating or last quarter phase with waxing, waning, respectively. So as Saturn is making that second waning square to itself, it's the crises in consciousness. So we combine that with that fourth Jupiter return, which is meant to be that once every 12-year renewal. And this is where we come to terms with the reality of where we are in our life. Again, this is what I can do. This is what I can't do. This is where my life is at. And it can be all over the place, positive or negative. We can have somebody just having career blossoming right now with Saturn. We're coming off of that waning Saturn trine to itself, now to the waning square, and we can have the full bloom and blossoming of all the productivity efforts in the second Saturn cycle. But we could still also perhaps be stuck in facing any declining aspects left over from early to mid 40s that could be crunching us in the face of mortality or the face of what we will call space-time limitations. To use career as an example again, it's possible that someone younger is we're being passed over for someone younger in regards to a career advancement when we have more knowledge and more wisdom. But in this consensus material world and in the technology industry we have going on right now, you're out of it by the time you're 40 sometimes. Examples can go positive and negative all over the place. The essence is that fourth Jupiter return, second Saturn waning square. It's making inner peace with ourselves, understanding life, and then letting that lead into making peace with whatever the circumstances are in our life. Another example for many of us is it's quite possible, Saturn to Saturn, that you could have multi-generational parenting issues coming up. You could have your own parents, if they're still around, facing health crises or issues. You could have your own young adult children facing maturation issues, perhaps facing their own parenting issues if you're becoming a grandparent. The examples, positive and negative, can be just as varied as there are charts. So the second Saturn waning square, am I at peace with my world? This is going to then lead us into very easily, almost the same time period, what we will experience as the first Chiron return to its natal position. One of the greatest potentials of the Chiron return is to continue any healing from the midlife crises aspects that we experienced all the way through our 40s. Chiron is the archetype of the wounded healer, and as we heal those wounds, we turn them into our talents and gifts. Before we move into that, though, I just want to put up a slide that I've used in prior Chiron classes, and that is the fact that Chiron's orbit between Saturn and Uranus is highly elliptical or eccentric. It will spend 3/5 of its cycle in just 4 signs. As you see on your screen, Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, and Taurus. It is right now in the sign of Aries, where it will be for 8 of those 51 years. When it gets over there to Virgo and Libra, it can spend a year and 15 months, year and a half, just zipping right through. We could ponder on this one for several hours of classes if we wanted to. There are those who feel, including Barbara Ann Clow, who wrote The Rainbow Bridge, one of the most popular Chiron books. She was one of those who felt that Chiron naturally ruled Virgo, because Kairos is hands, and chiropractics and massage and all of the healing touch with hand, Reiki, all that stuff came into popularity in the late 70s, early 80s, when Chiron was discovered in 1978. And so, because, for instance, the Chiron waxing square can happen between 5 and 23 years of age, the Chiron waning square can happen between 28 and 46 years of age. The Chiron opposition can be all over the place in between that. It's not really easy to put that in the chronological aspects. About the only one you can put in is you will have your Chiron return around that 50-51 year age, give or take a few months. We will all experience that. And so it is a very highly individualistic return. It's going back to the natal sign and house with the aspects, and yet synchronistic. And as I went through this whole chronological cycle with these aspects, it was like, oh, okay, yeah. One more aspect that comes at the end of all of those intense ones in the 40s that we call midlife. And now we're setting ourselves up into the 50s, where there will be a couple of aspects that will start to be a little more ease of aspect, if we can call it that. And so Here's this opportunity to heal from the 40s, to heal everything up to the first 50 years of our life. How well are we doing that? So it's a natural time period to review and understand those wounds and the trauma around those wounds. They become conscious during this Chiron return. And it is a very important time period to heal, to break free from that past and move forward with our life. And again, whether the wounds are 100% healed or not, we can still utilize our efforts to be of support and offering in the whole world of healing. Whether we're going to do it directly or indirectly. Whether we finally get that courage to hang our tarot card shingle out there and start reading for others, or we discover something else at this point in our life that is very rewarding and personally healing, and we want to share it some way. Can happen at other times in life, of course. But there is definitely something when we reach the anniversary of this 5th decade of life, if we are blessed to be here. There's definitely something about healing to this point and moving on. What will then follow that as we move into the mid-50s is we're going to move into that second progressed lunar return that will come just before the second Saturn return. So this means that the progressed moon has moved back to its natal position for the second time. Can you see how this can be healing on such deep, strong, emotional levels? We've had a second cycle emotionally of everything that we experience in one lunar calendar month, from new moon to new moon, or transiting moon, going over our natal moon and going around the chart. Slow down and expand it to the progressed moon cycle. And that becomes, I forgot what the first one is, divide that 26, 27 years of really working upon our emotional lessons, our emotional healing. So this will be a time period for evolving emotional self-awareness, making peace with our own emotional self-image, how we see ourselves on emotional levels, how we relate to ourselves inwardly on emotional levels, outwardly with others. This can be a time period of, beautiful emotional ahas and wisdom. So how can we then, and for many women, if you're female, it varies wildly, but many times those who've had biological children can find that you're going to move into those 50s and menopause starts. The natural time period to turn into the crone and share the feminine wisdom. Now, one of the distortions of this, of course, you're not guaranteed to be, emotionally wise if you're not going to do the work. You can sink into all your old patterns of emotional victimization and how they leave you stuck in your world. My partners always leave me, says the codependent second progressed lunar return. Or I have to take on all this responsibility now of my elderly parents when my immature mother or father never, nurtured or helped me mature in the first place. Again, we don't have the time to go into the details, just trying to point out some of those specific generic points that could be taking place during these time periods. And so what also, though, will come with this second progressed lunar return at almost the same time period is transiting Neptune, making the first waxing trine to itself at 54-55. Oh, can you see how it's going to be, positive or negative times 10, depending on how we're handling this emotional evolution along with the Neptune spiritual growth? Moon watering, moon ruling Cancer 4th and Neptune ruling Pisces 12th. Double water signature right now as we're moving into those middle 50s. Now, there's potential here for spiritual growth and deep, deep inner peace because it's a natural time to share some of this wisdom of the aging process as we understand it through broadening our spiritual, religious principles. So if we're really developing that inner relationship with Source, God, Goddess, Great Spirit, Big Kahuna, then that inner is going to reflect outer, and it is going to evolve deeper meaning and understanding with the relationships outside of ourselves. And we'll do that right along with that progressed second lunar return. However, waxing trines are what I call the couch potato aspects, or waning trines. Some of the distortion, we can get stuck in limiting beliefs via our religion or spirituality, and we get stuck in that for security reasons. We don't want to open up and look at something from a broader perspective. I'm right, you're wrong. My religion is better than yours, especially if your religion is shaking the security of my beliefs. So we can get pretty defiant here in defending our way versus the highway. And can you see then how we will get emotionally, defiant and radical? So it can naturally evolve and expand us emotionally, spiritually with these two aspects, or we can get pretty entrenched. And if that's the case, when we then move into 55, 56 years old, and we have that third nodal axis return, all of those karmic patterns, third time now, can really be conscious. And we can deny it and really, again, become quite emotionally entrenched in this decade in order to think we're secure, or if we have been really trying to understand ourselves emotionally, second lunar return, spiritually, Neptune waxing trine, then this third nodal axis return can really bring rites of passage with emotional maturation and renewal. It's up to each of us in where we're going to be. Then that's going to quickly be followed at about 56 by the first Uranus waning trine. Uranus is made at 240 degrees around the cycle from its natal position. How are we honoring our unique individuality within our world, within our society? There is potential here for social rewards. Obviously, Uranus to Uranus friendships and partnerships, but that 240-degree mark is where we go from 30 Scorpio to 0 Sag. So it can bring possible rewards with intimacy. We really have developed a friendship with our intimate partner over the long term. Or if we had, more than one relationship, there's a potential here to find one later in life that's really based upon a foundation of friendship to support intimacy. There can be familial rewards because we've been making effort with family to this point in our life. However, waning trine, couch potato, we could get entrenched in our groups and refuse to look outside of our social structures because it rocks our boat. The potential would be to expand social awareness, but it's not guaranteed. And especially in some of your consensus conditionings where, for instance, in the political divides we have going on between, liberals and conservatives, or what I like to say, inclusive versus exclusive groups. It can, we can be at this age group and really entrenched again in my way or the highway. My group's better than your group. And then as we move into that latter part of our 50s, we're going to approach that second Saturn return. And so this is both a crisis and a renewal with the reality of space and time. The first Saturn cycle, the first 28, 29 years Saturn goes around the chart, is known generically in astrology as the potential to heal our karma. And then that second Saturn cycle around the chart is loosely called a productivity cycle. We're an adult. We matured. We've learned our place in society. We've learned how society functions and works. We start moving through society. What have we accomplished in that second Saturn cycle? We can still see some of those rewards as we approach that second Saturn return, but we can also see the disappointments and the letdowns if we didn't make an effort with productivity, or if there was something about lifetimes of karma that says this shall be how you function in space time. Again, a generic example, if we have I'll use consensus so the individuating and spirituated souls can, take a sigh of relief, although you're not out of the woods. But we could have somebody in consensus state of consciousness who, abused resources, who had mega resources. And they come through this lifetime, and for whatever reasons, they just can't get beyond paycheck to paycheck. Now, I'm not saying this is what it is for everybody who is paycheck to paycheck. Again, there's no absolutes here. These are loose examples. But there may be certain karmic aspects that can take that second Saturn return, and instead of being really productive on that outer level, It's about productivity on an inner level. That Moon Cancer 4th opposite Saturn Capricorn 10th. And if we don't have the consciousness, Saturn, to recognize that, it can be disappointed, especially if we want to compare ourselves to keeping up with the Joneses or the neighbor next door. And so there can be, several examples of how we'll go forward with this. And there can be several examples of the rewards or the lack thereof. One thing about the second Saturn return that will probably be active for everyone is that the aging process is in full swing, and we have to make peace with whatever the specific circumstances, reality, and limits exist for us in the space and time of our world. Coming off of that Neptune waxing trine in the mid 50s, it becomes very, very important that we don't do any Saturnian judgments here. That we are really, willing to have some honest self-reflections with ourselves. And we make peace with whatever we perceive as a limitation in our world. Can you shift that cup half empty to half full, to use a Virgo cliche? Can you find that attitude of gratitude? What will happen right after that second Saturn return, or perhaps even in the midst of it, is we'll have the second progressed Sun-Moon return. And so again, if you were born with Moon 60 degrees waxing sextile Sun in your very late 20s with the first Saturn return, Sun and Moon by progression will come back to the same spot in your natal chart. Here they are for the second time, coming back to the same angular relationship by progression to whatever your natal Sun Moon angular relationship is. So here is the potential for creative self-actualization to the degree that our soul has emotionally matured. Solar lunar. So how well have you been working on your emotional maturation and self-love? And then how does that allow you to have an expression of yourself? And that expression doesn't have to be some outer creative thing that everybody notices. You finally had your artwork sell, or, you finally remodeled your house, whatever. It doesn't have to be outward. It can be inward. It can be the soul making peace with ourselves, being happy with ourselves. So getting what I'm pointing out here from the 40s to the 50s, and we'll make so much of that second Saturn return, but it does not happen in isolation. There are several aspects right along with this second Saturn return, including that shortly after it, we'll have the fifth Jupiter return to its natal position. Here's another one of those aspects in which we search for how well We are at peace with ourselves and our understanding of life. We may have achievements to celebrate. Perhaps it's a natural time period where we're starting to slow down. We can enjoy our life a little better. We can enjoy relationships a little better, regardless of the reality of the circumstances in our life. This is one more of those time periods to find inner peace. And when you look at this sun-moon progressed return with the Jupiter return, can you see how this is spiritual, emotional? A lot of inner work to celebrate the big 6-0. Hey, I made it this far. I'm still here on planet Earth. However, again, emotional and spiritual inner peace with regardless of however we are experiencing ourselves out there in the world. Here's what comes right along with this. At more or less 60 years of age, every solar arc forecasting planet now makes that waxing sextile 60-degree mark to its natal position. And I've looked at this one for many years in charts with clients and drawing people in their late 50s or early 60s. I will many times say our consensus society starts to look at you as being over the hill at 60. In the United States, many can take early Social Security at 62. We're kind of maybe pushed out for younger ones when we, get to the mid 60s and they don't want to pay because we can, they don't want our healthcare expenses because, now Medicare will take care of it. So we're kind of taught in traditional society that, again, we're over the hill. We don't have anything productive to make. And yet, what is the waxing sextile? It's half of a trine. It is a creative aspect. And so I will many times tell astrological clients, this can be some of the most creative time period of your life. Sun waxing sextile itself, Moon waxing sextile itself, Jupiter waxing sextile itself. Yes, it will be relative to individual signs and houses, but this is a time period, crescent phase, to really understand ourselves on ever more broader levels and move forward with new expressions of ourselves. And when I say this to the Pluto and Leo generation, many of them are like, oh gosh, that's so nice to hear. Because Leo never wants to slow down. It never wants to age. 60 is the new 40, isn't it? However, again, if you're buying into some of the consensus conditionings, or if there are perhaps physical circumstances that have you thinking your life is over or has nothing more to offer, you're not guaranteed crescent phase to rebirth creativity. It's a yin phase, and you can go inward into further withdrawal. Ease of effort, ease of reward is what I say with waxing sextiles and waxing trines. Here's another detail for you. Jeffrey Green's teachings would say that when a planet makes a waxing sextile to a natal planet, decisions made at that time period will affect the rest of the cycle around the chart. Let's extrapolate that to solar arcs. So every solar arc planet being 60 degrees from its natal position. And there is an effort necessary here. To the degree we make the efforts to evolve with whatever our circumstances say for us, we can be setting up opportunity in a future life. So there's a real optimistic way to look at this fifth Jupiter return. Moving along a few years, and I'm going to check my time. It looks like I'm going fairly good here. Moving along a few years to about 63. Here's transiting Uranus making the waning square, last quarter square to its natal position. That crisis in consciousness. This is the crisis with our individual sense of purpose, our unique individuality, feeling like it no longer matters in life or the social structures. And so again, we can follow through on that solar arc aspect and sink into the defeatism and doesn't make any difference. Or we can use this crisis to renew our individuality, to renew our sense of self, which then allows us to renew our purpose in society. We've got the freedom to be more socially active many times. We can join those kids out there that are protesting the effects of climate change. We've got the wherewithal to perhaps learn how to be productive for a social cause that's near and dear to us that perhaps we didn't have the time for when we were busy raising the kids and putting bread on the table. Again, individual situation for every chart. Now it will be another one of those natural time periods to face the aging process. And the most generic one that will come at this time period is losing friends in our 60s. We're starting to read the obits if you still look at your hometown newspaper, and now your friends are showing up in the obituary columns. There can be perhaps a sense of loneliness if friends are leaving us. It can be a lifelong friendship with a partner and they decide that, they're going to leave the northern plains and move to Florida. Leroy and I have had that happen with a couple that we love dearly. Of course, they invite us to go down there, which we actually did last winter. So again, just another little example of what's going on. And of course, that's going to be followed then at 65 plus with the fourth time the nodal axis is going to oppose itself. Oh, here comes another one of those emotional reviews and emotional objectivities. What else do we have to heal in regards to our emotional karma? Because the nodal axis is so closely related to Pluto, and in evolutionary astrology with Pluto and the nodal axis, we call that the karmic axis, natally in polarities. This can be a review of how well we have been achieving the Pluto polarity intent in this life on deep soul levels. Now, if you have Pluto conjunct the North Node, that polarity intent is not your soul's lessons. This is not a class. I refer you to the early EA classes on that. But can you see this nodal axis opposition, how, again, this can be such a natural time period to review on emotional levels How well has your soul been evolving this life? Still here. By the way, you're going to be learning those soul lessons with every breath you take for as long as you are still here. You don't get to face a chronological age point and say, oh, I'm done with Pluto. By the way, Pluto's coming, okay? And so now this then comes in those mid 60s with third time Saturn's making the waxing square or crises in action with itself. We have to continue to face the reality of aging, recognizing in our 60s what we can and cannot do on physical levels. What's still there with any familial relationships and any familial patterns? Saturn square Saturn. What are you doing to continue to heal familial patterns until your last breath in a physical body? Now, this one can be a classic retirement age. And then also finding purpose at this stage of life. You remember the classic thing they say about the white male, at least in the westernized world? They put so much effort into their career. And if they had no life outside of career, when they finally retire and slow down, it's the classic heart attack and keel over. I have to give my own father credit for that, who, by the way, is just turned 86 last week. He did retire in his early mid 60s, but he went on and started collecting and repairing antique farm machinery when he left farming. And so he got real active in that area, and it gave him a real strong sense of purpose for many, many years moving forward there. Finally, Jupiter's going to reach that 6 Saturn return, more potential for spiritual wisdoms and rewards, or financial rewards, or disappointments, because we didn't have that ability to manifest in the world as we wanted to. No judging it. Source does not judge what we do physically alone. Source looks at the intent behind any manifestation on any level. And so, what have we done spiritually, mentally, and emotionally as well? That then can help carry us into the third time that Saturn makes an opposition to itself. Can we objectify that aging process and make peace with our reality, whatever it is? Make peace with the mortality of death and dying? The third Saturn cycle is kind of known as a reward cycle. If we healed the karma first time around, if we were productive second time around, there's a lot of potential for rewards the third time around. The sailing off into the retirement sunset, so to speak, however we want to manifest that. Leroy and I, in our early 60s, have a lot of family members and friends who are taking retirements in their 60s. A couple of family members who, a career in nursing, a career in, banking, plugged away in the consensus world and now get that official consensus retirement. Leroy and I have been talking about that over the last few years and going, we're not going to have a traditional retirement. We're self-employed. And my joke is, as long as I have brain cells, I'm going to read astrological charts. And so as we move through this third Saturn cycle, one more time, it's going to be as varied as we are as individuals. However, there will be something about that third Saturn opposition where we are having to make peace with our physical world and what we can and cannot do, make peace with the reality of circumstances in our life, and make peace with death and dying in general. Or can you pick up the book of the Tibetan Book of Death and Dying and make your way through that? You know, can you do Course of Miracles and find some spiritual renewals through the Saturn opposition realities? You can see around 75, the fourth nodal axis return, more emotional healing, or with the Saturn opposition, there can be emotional depression with the aging process. We have Saturn move into its third waning square, more crises around limitations of aging. How well do we support our inner life that makes peace with these outer circumstances? At that same time, we're going to move into our third progressed lunar return. The third time that the progressed moon is going to come back to its natal position. Ooh, here we really are going to be asked to find inner emotional peace. You know, especially with these Saturn aspects that we just experienced through our 70s. And now we're starting a new decade. Do we have emotional self-reliance? I rely on myself for my emotional needs and sustainment. We may find ourselves single, especially if you're female. In the westernized world, the women traditionally outlive the men. I have a mother-in-law, Leroy's mom. Now she's 86, like my dad. We lost Leroy's father after a long battle with cancer in January, and his mom had moved the two of them into a senior living area for her dad. They spent a year there. She's now spent a year there on her own, and all along we've been saying, Mom, you're too young to be with these old folks. You need to get your own condo. You still drive. You still do everything for yourself. You need to find some people who are younger than you. So Leroy and his brother took his mother condo shopping last week, and it was still it's a senior area, but you know, you have your own condos you own. You don't throw away thousands of dollars of rent every month. And here are these elderly people walking around, and I remember, I'm paraphrasing Leroy's story, you know, here's these elderly people going, oh, we need some young ones to move into our place. So there's a whole perspective of how do you feel about the aging process? You know, is it depressing you? Are you emotionally stuck? Or are you emotionally birthing as you celebrate 8 decades and start the 9th one? And you can see what follows on the heels of this one. Here's another moon Neptune again. We run into that first Neptune opposition in our early 80s, and this is the one that my mother has been going through. She's 81, and she's going to have her Neptune oppositions. I think she may be starting them right now. And I can't remember if she's going to have 3 or 5, but she's that Neptune and Virgo generation, and Neptune and Pisces going to oppose it. And so here's a real strong spiritual crisis over your beliefs. Does the outer world support your inner life, or is it creating disappointment? What do you believe now? I kind of sense my mom having some surrenderings and even kind of spiritually opening up again. We were very, very close with metaphysics in my 30s and my 40s. And then we kind of grew apart for a while spiritually. And I feel like my mom, I don't want to say regressed, but she settled into what was comfortable, being married to a consensus partner. And with her open heart surgery that she had earlier this year, rocked her world. And it really had her face life and death. And she really has come out of it was, I want to live. And so, here she is questioning various things that she thought she had all figured out. And I'm trying to be supportive without sounding like the oldest daughter preacher. I told you so. Zip those lips, Kimberly. And so what can really be part of this cycle with the Neptune opposition is there's so much consensus conditioning. Approximately 7 out of 10 souls on planet Earth. And this is where human-made religions exist. And so there can be that desire to cling to the human-made religions, and especially if we've been conditioned with those for 8+ decades. Another quick example, because Leroy and I have had four parents in their 80s and now 3. Leroy's mom belonged to quote unquote the church. Growing up in the Northern Plains, she never went to church in a building. They had traveling pastors, and they would stay from home to home preaching, and they would gather from home to home. And every so often they'd have the summer outdoor picnic or something like that. And with the crossover of Leroy's father early this year, Leroy's mother has went back to her church. His dad never belonged to any organized religion or system, and he said, I could care less what kind of ceremony I have. So his wife took over. And now she has weekly meetings with the church, various members coming to the house or picking her up and taking her to a meeting somewhere. And so the whole family has said, Mom's 86. We're not going to judge this. We're looking at this as a social opportunity for our mother. We are not going to broaden her spiritual awareness and understandings at this point in life. If it gives her some comfort, so be it. So my mom is opening back up, and Leroy's mom is going, oh, but this is what I've known my whole life. I can't let go of this. I've got to re-embrace it. So we're not guaranteed objectivity at the Neptune opposition. Again, we can actually nebulously deny it and cling to the truth, and that's what they call it in my mother-in-law's world. Well, I belong to the truth. I've had some nice conversations with my mother-in-law over the years. Sometimes we've agreed to disagree. And she, over the years, is going, I don't understand what my daughter-in-law does, but I know she's spiritual. So you can see there can be examples all over the place here. And some of it is really going to depend upon how cognitively conscious we are in our aging process. You know, relative to the westernized world and a lot of denial or suppression or laziness with what we call diet, exercise, and rest. My father's never exercised in his life, and he has early Alzheimer's. Maybe exposure to a lot of chemicals in the farm world. But, you know, sometimes this Neptune opposition can just bring a total detachment from reality with the world. There's a body there, but no one's home. And so we can keep that body alive, but how well are we nurturing it and supporting the inner world, emotionally, mentally, spiritually? Because what happens right along with the heels of this Neptune opposition to itself are three aspects coming along around 84 years of age. We have the fifth nodal axis opposition to its natal position, can support the Neptune emotional spiritual objectivity or not. We have the seventh Jupiter return, can support searching for inner peace with our life and the world at large or not. And we have the first Uranus return, which is a natural life review of all of the karmic consensus patterning and the degree to which we were able to individualize in this lifetime. Now, this again will be directly relative to the degree of cognitive self-awareness. And of course, Uranus return can bring potential upsets, physical upsets with our health, maybe mental health upsets. This is when we were really seeing my dad start to go downhill mentally, and it's strongly progressed in the last few years, having just turned 86. It can be losing our mate or partner. More of our friends have crossed over. Are we the only one left? But it also has that potential to bring a renewed sense of ourself and to be uniquely who we are, even at this age of our life. Again, how are we setting up the potential for the next life here? And so all of these aspects kind of have to be taken into consideration into these early 80s to then see how we're going to go with that third Saturn return that can come right with the Uranus return or later in the late 80s, depending upon the individual charts and born with a planet retrograde or the beginning of a retrograde or end of a retrograde cycle natally, etc. So here's where that Lord of Karma, I like karma better. Here's where the Lord of Karma brings lessons and rewards in all areas of life. Physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. Because physical, Saturn. Emotional, Jupiter return. Mental, the Uranus return. Spiritual, Neptune opposition. And of course, that third Saturn returns, making peace with mortality. So it can start to feel like a lot of these aspects are blending in with each other as we move through the 70s and 80s. And a lot of it will depend upon how well you are actually still mentally cognitive. What will then come at approximately 90 years of age is another solar arc aspect. Every forecasting planet has moved 90 degrees, waxing first quarter square to its natal position. If we are cognitively conscious, this is going to be a crisis in every area. Who am I? What did I do this lifetime? What has been my purpose here? How do I reflect and work to set up my next life? And then this is the last aspect that I put into this picture. And this is the fifth nodal axis return. And if we still have those brain cells, this will be finding inner emotional peace, reviewing our life lessons, continuing those preparations relative to crossing over to spirit world again. All through 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, depending on, whatever, I will relate to those clients that come forward and say, what are you doing to set up your next life? What do you feel are your unachieved desires? What will bring you here again? And mostly younger clients, well, what do I got to do to learn my lessons so I don't have to come here again? And my joke is, well, if you make that statement, you just earned yourself 6 more lifetimes. Picking a number out of the air. And it's really making peace with what would you have me know and do, source. So again, probably every single one of us on this phone call is going to come back again. So instead of being disappointed about it, what is it I have yet to discover and learn? What is it I would like to do yet? And if we move into these, 8th, 9th, 10th, or beyond decade of life, to consciously ponder that and work to create it as gracefully as possible next time around. So we haven't had Pluto in any of these PowerPoint slides so far, so I just wanted to say a couple of things. Again, it's kind of like Chiron. Pluto has a highly elliptical orbit. It averages 248 years around the chart through the zodiac. Its shortest transit is in Scorpio. Isn't that interesting? 12 years, and its longest transit is 32 years in Taurus. You can see on your screen here that I have broken down the years of orbit for you. I will say this verbally real fast in case somebody's listening to this on audio. 30 years, Aries 30 years, Taurus 32, Gemini 30 years, Cancer 25 years, Leo 19, Virgo 15 years, Libra 13 years, Scorpio 12 years, Sag 13 years, Capricorn 15 years, Aquarius 19, Pisces 25. And so because of that variance, all of the transiting Pluto aspects to its natal position vary quite widely. And to give you one example, because we have a tendency to look at the Pluto waxing square to itself as happening in the 40s, which makes it part of the midlife crises. Well, guess what? The young ones today are having their Pluto waxing square in their, I think, mid to late 30s. And it's starting to get, I think it's starting to get longer again with that waxing Pluto square. But that waxing square can occur from your early 30s to your late 60s. And so we could do all kinds of PowerPoint slides and pondering on how, relative to the signs and the generational archetypes it's moving through, might be necessary for some generations to have it earlier, other generations to have it later. I call it just the synchronicity of these cycles. So in general, we all know this most likely in the world of EA, each Pluto aspect to its natal position is a time period of soul growth, typically through some type of death and rebirth. And it can happen physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Don't think because Pluto rules Scorpio, it's only going to happen emotionally. Don't think because you're the Pluto and Leo generation, it's only going to happen spiritually. Pluto aspects happen on all 4 levels, and many times all 4 of them at the same time. You don't skip one. And then, of course, this is true for every single aspect we've looked at in this 2-part series. Both the natal planet and the forecasting planet must be looked at by their positions with sign, house, and aspects. That's how you flesh out the details of what we have discussed in this 2-part series. All right, so for sake of ease with looking through everything, I have put together, oh, one more slide, sorry, forgot I put this one in here. This is just some bullet points I wrote way back in 2010. Our current Pluto transit cycle started when Pluto went into Aries April of 1822. No retrograde, just went in. Pluto in Libra, Scorpio, and Sag cycle from 71 through 2008, approximately 40 years, was a modality cycle. Cardinal Libra, fixed Scorpio, mutating Sag. Was a modality cycle or a quarter cycle of evolving outer relationships and cosmological understanding of life. Pluto in Capricorn starts the soul learning how to link one's own philosophy, following Pluto Sag, within the framework of society. Capricorn is a cardinal modality, so a new cycle, new energy is starting. It is a collective crisis in consciousness, last quarter square to the 1822 Aries initiation point. Pluto in Capricorn and Pisces from 2008 to 2068, 60 years, is a modality cycle that encompasses expanding societal frameworks until society itself must rebirth with Pluto in Aries. So I went and got that previous slide from an old Pluto workshop in 2010, and then I thought, oh, I'm just going to put this one in here, because isn't it interesting having a review 10, 11 years later with Pluto in Capricorn? New cycles with our framework of society. I'm still waiting for them. I think the seed thoughts are coming, but we're going to need some Pluto and Aquarius to really help rebel and manifest it. And yet, relative to Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto having their conjunctions in Capricorn next year with 1 and 0 Aquarius, maybe those new frameworks of society coming hopefully sooner rather than later. But I thought I'd just leave that in there for any of you who wanted to study the Pluto cycle a little broader. Here's what I was talking about. I took the first 2 I took this two-part series. Let me say that. I took the two-part series and I went back and I took all the aspects in which I put together chronological, and I've put them in PowerPoint slides without anything else, so you can have just a succinct chronological way of looking at everything. So as I work through showing you the next few slides here over several minutes, I just want to open up and see if there are any comments or questions from anybody. And Leroy, even my partner, honey.
No raising of hands yet here on the
Okay.
board. Okay, so
All right. If there isn't any comments or
got somebody
questions,
there?
that's.
Wonderful.
Oh, looks like a hand was raised.
All right, here we go. Go ahead, Wanda. Hello, Wanda. Oh, hold on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, I'm using I'm using my phone, so I'm trying to get used to this app on here.
You're good. You're good. We can hear you.
Okay, great. I wanted a quick definition on what are solar arcs and why would you use them? Because I really don't understand much about them, and there's not really a whole lot of information out there about what they
Oh,
are and why they're used.
that's a good question. It's really simple, honey. Okay. We have transits, which is where the planets actually are in the sky. And most of us, when we work with forecasting, start with the transits, the forecasting planet making an angular relationship to the natal planet. Major or solar progressions, progressions for short. Solar arcs or directions, solar arcs for short. They're just two different mathematical methods that have the same interpretation as transits. And so let me get a simple example for you. Let's work with Venus. And let's work with transiting Venus making a first quarter square to natal Venus. First quarter square is a crisis in action around our values with Venus, around our inner and outer relationships with its natural rulership, Taurus, Libra. If solar arc Venus moves 90 degrees from natal Venus, it's the same interpretation. It's a waxing square crisis in consciousness around our values and our inner and outer relationships. The transiting Venus waxing square to itself is in orb for maybe a couple of weeks. The solar arc waxing square of Venus to itself and the progressed waxing square of Venus to itself is a 3-year window of influence. Year before, year of, year after. So it's all the solar arc and progression aspects do, with the exception of progressed moon, they expand the orb of influence with the aspect to make it be a deeper aspect. But the principles are the same. Let me contrast this with traditional astrology. I don't hear it so much anymore, but when I first started studying astrology, and I was pretty well blessed to start with EA, I kept hearing traditional astrology say, well, progressions are inner stuff and solar arcs are outer stuff, or progressions mean X, Y, Z and solar arcs mean A, B, C. And as I moved through the cycle of phases and aspects and really understood the archetypes, and then a forecasting archetype to a natal archetype, it didn't matter how the math was. The principles are the same. And that is, by the way, what Jeffrey Wolf Green taught in his original teachings as well. It was gobbledygook to try and separate an archetype of progressions from solar arcs from transits. So to answer your question, principles of interpretation are the same. It's the math that's different. Now, I don't have this on a slide, but I'm going to say one more thing, and you guys can jot this one down if you want. Okay. With major progressions, the inner planets are faster than solar arcs. I'll repeat that. With progressions, the inner planets are faster than solar arcs. Say it another way. With the inner planets, a day for a year is faster. Excuse me. A day for a year is faster than a degree for a year. With the outer planets, solar arcs are faster than progressions. And I'll repeat that. With the outer planets, solar arcs are faster than progressions. So in other words, with the outer planets, a degree for a year is faster than a day for a year. Now, because when I draw up a chart, I do forecasting for 3 years. I do transits, progressions, solar arcs for 3 years. I find that there's always a blend of all three. And if you're only looking at transits or you're only looking at progressions, you will miss solar arc aspects that can really add detail into what's on the horizon. And vice versa. If you only use transits and solar arcs, but you forget to use progressions, you're missing details about what's on the horizon.
Kim?
All right.
Can we go to Letty?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Letty.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I guess you kind of explained it because I wanted to know when you applied this information. I mean, sometimes it's pretty obvious on a natal chart, but are you mainly using the chronological aspects when you're doing the transits, the solar arc, and the progression charts?
No, it's all of the above, Letty.
Okay.
When I draw the forecasting up, transits, progression, solar arcs for a 3-year window, for example, if it's the early 40s, the Saturn opposition at 42 is going to show up.
Okay. So
You just
become aware of these highlights and see if others showing up in the natal or in any of the charts.
Yes. And one of the, go ahead.
Like you're extracting more detail then.
Yes. And one of the things that I explained in part 1 of this series is that the inspiration for this came from a book by Alexander Ruperti. And he was a German astrologer who was friends with Dean Rudier. Alexander is E-R, A-L-E-X-A-N-D-E-R, Ruperti, R-U-P-E-R-T-I. The book he wrote was Cycles of Becoming.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that.
Yeah, it was one of those rare astrology books that was republished. And so you should be able to easily get copies of that. And I still think it's a good book. It's a book I read a lot in my in the 80s and 90s when I was studying, and he had a chart in there, and I literally took his chart and just expanded it. And so this has been a class I've wanted to teach for a while. So it's a basics that you guys can just go back to if you have clients and you just want to see generically what are the aspects at a certain age when the client comes to you.
Mm-hmm.
You can just quickly look at this 2-part series in these slides that I just put up.
Yeah. You know, because I really have not been taught to use solar arcs. And now when you're saying you're missing the picture, I can see why.
You're
Would you
missing
ever,
you're missing the complete picture, okay? Transits,
will you ever cover,
progressions, solar
are you
arcs.
ever going to cover that, running those type of charts and how you do it or how it would be good for a reading?
If you would like me to, I've been pondering what I'm going to do for material in November, December, and I've kind of wanted to just do some one-off or real short class series before moving into planetary pairs, which I'm going to make a real long series. And so we could revisit that. We
I
can,
think
we can.
for me, I would like to understand it. You know, I've ran it, it's done, but I've never really paid a lot of attention to it.
Well,
So
let
now,
me ask you this, Letty, because you asked the question, will you show up in November and be my live chart example?
sure,
Okay.
no problem.
So we're looking at November 19th, 2 to 4 p.m. So check your calendar. If it doesn't work, let me know right away. And
Well,
so what we'll do is you know, I can't remember if I have your environmental conditionings, but I'll be in touch with you.
okay.
And then we'll literally look at forecasting with your chart from the perspective of all 3 methods: transits, solar arcs, and progressions.
Terrific. Thank you so much. This was so fascinating.
Oh, thank you, honey.
I mean, I'm thinking about my life as you're going through that. It's like, oh, holy, that really correlates.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Yep. Oh,
Really
yeah.
powerful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Letty. Any other questions? Oh, and I wanted to say here, if somebody has some subject matters, you know, email me, toss them at me, or email them on the Segment 1 Facebook group if you want. And again, I'm looking for short standalone or 2-part classes, just trying to cover basics. And then I'm planning next year to move into those planetary pairs. But I'll start with popular planetary pairs probably, but I'm going to work with all the planetary pairs. So you'll really have a resource from EA's perspective, but that might take us 5 years to do.
Well, you've had a lot of response for progression solar arcs information, so I think you're onto something here between now and the end of the year, Kim.
Okay, sure. And if we want to, you know, maybe we'll take more than 1 month and maybe do, you know, 2 classes, 2 separate charts. So, but using all 3 of those forecasting methods, if we want. So here's my future webinars. There's a free Mercury retrograde in Scorpio coming up. We're already in its shadow. And of course, the Jupiter in Capricorn, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto. I'm going to do a class on that stellium and then my forecast. And then, of course, I also am going to be part of EA Zoom's forecast for 2020. All right. Any other questions?
Well, I think I have an announcement here. We've talked about, Kim, in terms of the EA platform. We're going to add our segment 3 health and wellness DVDs to segment 2 relationship astrology. So I just kind of want to invite all these segment 1 students, if they have not yet upgraded, now would be a good time to do so, because I'll be uploading, probably another 30, at least 30, if not 50 hours of information to segment 2 archives. So I'll invite you to
And
do that.
then all the PDF files as well.
Yeah, we got it. That's where the work is.
The
So we
3-ring binder.
yeah, we're gonna have to get a lot. We're gonna have to get a PDF, secured PDF, put in there as well. So consider that. We'd love to have you in segment 2. And I guess on behalf of Kim Marie, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next month on the 19th. I think is what I heard, for a little,
Yep, 19th.
little review on progression solar arcs on a personal basis. Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone.